A very good morning to all present here, and I'm very thankful at the outset to FINS for giving me this opportunity to participate in this discussion. And carrying on from where Dr. Arnab had left, I would now specify or channel the discussion into three very specific domains: the military strategic domain, its adjunct economic domain, and the domestic politics in particularly in India, which has uh, we have been witnessing, especially in the aftermath of the second wave. Uh, Beginning with this strategic and military domain, I would like to give you all a context. August 2019, when Article 370 was revoked, immediately after the revocation, S. Jaishankar, our foreign minister, had gone on an official trip to Beijing. He meets his Chinese counterpart, the Chinese foreign minister, and essentially, as a sign of communication, takes the India's neighbor into confidence that this is an entirely internal act, parliament sanctioned by the parliament, and this is merely an act of administration. So we are doing an administrative reorganization. And India doesn't have any such intention to stake up any claims, sovereignty claims. Because again, if we go by the 1994 Parliament resolution, Aksai Chin stands very much as a part of India. So, and of course, but that status quo would not change unilaterally. So, words to that effect and message to that effect was conveyed to the Chinese foreign minister. Now, the irony is the Chinese minister totally refutes the statement of the Indian foreign minister, and uh, strains, he underscores on the point that during British India, Tibet and Leh Ladakh, since it had no boundary, the Tibet Autonomous Region and Indian part of Ladakh, so hence a question of an re-administration or a boundary created between Ladakh and Tibet simply does not exist. Now look at the double play in here. China de-recognizes the McMahon line because it is a colonial line. But in case of Tibet and Ladakh, they are China upholds that same colonial line. So one thing is very apparent that all these last 5 decades, in the name of a dispute, I totally disagree that this is a dispute. All this while they have been building up on their comprehensive national power. In the name of negotiations, China has been buying its own sweet time. And I think of late that strategic ambiguity between our relationship is over, which is, I believe, to India's good. Now coming to contemporary facets, China recently launches a Galaxy 1 satellite named Galaxy 1. It's a dual-use satellite. But what our Indian military experts have observed that these satellites work very well in low latency and even in inclement weather conditions. So real-time mapping and real-time information of all Indian troop movements in that area and vicinity stretching up to Himachal is readily available to the Chinese troops, to the Chinese military. Because what we have seen in our TV coverage last year during the entire Doklam standoff, it was essentially a coverage reduced to tactics and conventional aspects. But if we look at the build-up in that area, a lot of fiber opticals have come up, low frequency radar, high frequency radars have come up. They are heavily investing in what we see as information warfare. They are laying out these huge, enormous stretches of fiber cables. And coupled with that, with these kind of apparatus being set up, what China has done, they have now seemingly disengaged from the Pangong Tso area, but in Kangziwar and Rudok areas, they have hardened their positions. They are carrying out a military air force exercise, and in a first, they are carrying out a joint military drill with Pakistani army. I mean, drills between nations is an absolutely normal thing to do. But what has been noteworthy is the Pakistani army for the first time is conducting a drill with the Chinese army in Tibet. So these entails a very worrying scenario, I would say, for India, and it's high time. All the talk of investing into commands and joint theater commands, synchronizing all the our cattle assets together, I really hope it gets done sooner than later. And I'm sure to that effect, the government and the Indian Armed Forces must be devising their own plans. Now, and one more aspect which came out of those last year's Galwan exercise, and this is all linked with COVID. At the time when India was grappling with COVID, they encroached in Galwan. What we saw was a flurry of misinformation campaign being spread by the Chinese state, ISPR, and very pliant channels and networks inside India's country. People with absolute no iota of knowledge about security and strategy. These are people, well-established people in mainstream media. They went on for months and months inducing doubts. Now it can be well said that, of course, majority of the population wouldn't be falling for that kind of a propaganda. But even if, let's say, 10% of the doubt is induced, even in 10% of our population, I think it's a job done for them. So this is an aspect of psychological warfare. There are several terms we might give it to it: asymmetric warfare, fifth generation warfare, hybrid warfare. And during COVID, what we have seen now, coming to the economic aspect, the adjunct aspect of the military aspect, of course, except China, and this, of course, this recent data was published the March and January to February quarter. Except India, and probably with the exception of China, the entire world is going through a period of very deep recession. Economies have been taken back by years. Now, again, we have been hearing this entire chorus being built up that Indian economy is in a state of collapse. The economy is in an absolute state of disaster. Now, to get certain pertinent points right, our fundamentals are stronger than ever before. Now, when we look at the sheer scale of cushioning efforts being done by the government, crores and crores of people with direct benefit transfers. You had consecutive 2 years where food grains have been doled out to people. The moratoriums on loan payments have been extended. So in such a scenario, with a lockdown or restrictions in place, you do not expect our country's, India's economy to boom. And this is exactly the kind of interplay which is happening in full consonance with the larger strategy devised by China, that when, due to absolutely external factors, mostly because of external factors, a country's economy or its larger internal political debates gets vitiated, and these are absolute weak points in democracy which are usually exploited. And talking about one more point about the economy, when all these things are happening, of course, there are enactment issues on part of the government, but what we have seen, that squarely the blame gets rested on the governments of the day, on the Indian government. And there is a section which is trying extremely hard to pinpoint all the blame squarely on the government and absolutely forget even, mentioning the role of the Chinese or big corporations involved. A vitiated atmosphere is being trying to be created, because this is something, actually, as the Prime Minister said, in probably once or maybe once in several centuries even. So in that case, the communication systems need to be very up to the mark. And regarding statistics, before I move on to the more precise section, regarding statistics, what I see is during this economic distress, see, this time the virus has also spread to our internal rural areas, unlike the first wave, which was essentially restricted to the urban areas. Now, what that entails is a movement has happened from the rural areas to the urban areas. So, in at least this going to be a temporary phenomena for the next 4 to 5 months. There will be a huge push in manufacturing, and if we link it up with the MSMEs, there will be a huge spurt in jobs, and most of these will be quite high skill jobs. Now, for low skill jobs, government already has a 1 lakh crore infrastructure pipeline in the bay, and as soon as it gets kick-started, one example, if I may give you, the Bharatmala project, the enormous highway project, and the moment that kick-starts, there is absolutely no doubt that those highways will be having a huge, those infrastructure projects will be having a huge multiplier effect in terms of not only job creation, but also overall the improvement of India's economic health. But we might enter into a peculiar situation because the services sector has been the worst hit during this phase. Your hospital, the aviation sector, the hospitality, the hotel sector. So we might have a two-track employment scenario where the very skilled and the absolutely unskilled people, there are employment avenues for them, but it's sort of the semi-skilled population or the semi-skilled workforce, basically employed in the services sector, who might remain unemployed for at least 2 quarters or so. So this is the essentially the economic aspect which I have covered. Now, the third dimension which I am about to speak on is the internal politics and the kind of sabotage which has been tried to be instigated inside the country. Uh, to give you a very particular example, I address three issues. Once this internal politics or a certain ecosystem is solely they have tried to pinpoint the blame on the government. With second, what they have done, they are trying to normalize this virus as if this disease is some routine viral infection, an established disease for which we already had an established medical cure and vaccines, and hence if there are deaths happening or if this India has suffered, the entire world has suffered, it's entirely, as I say, of course, a part of the blame does lie with the specific governments. Entirely, it lies with the government. So, to give you an example, because a lot of hue and cry, brouhaha is raised over freedom of speech and expression whenever government tries to regulate any sort of irresponsible coverage, media coverage. America has a HIPAA Act which they had passed in 1996, which bars media coverage during epidemics if they at all they find that that coverage contravenes with some basic ethics. For example, this year and even during last year, many COVID-related deaths in America were incarcerated. Hospitals had ran out of capacity. Many of those bodies had to be disposed of. But you didn't see the kind of streaming of those visuals which we saw in our country, the lighting of those fires. Again, there's that psychological aspect behind it. You see, it's the cradle of democracy, right? It's apparently the ideal democracy in the world. Japan has a state of the emergency legislation which they had passed in 2012. Again, this time around, they have made amendments to the legislation where if any such kind of irresponsible reporting is found, heavy penalty is imposed. We have seen that same trend happening in India. A cycle of chaos has been tried to create. Ultimately, see, from day one, the initiation itself, doomsday scenarios have been predicted. Now, let's give an example that there is this hue and cry going around that India's vaccination policy has been a failure. Now, vaccinating a country of more than 1 billion people is, of course, a lengthy process. It's not a crash course or a pilot project where there is a 2-week period taken. And even if we look at the average speed, India has managed to vaccinate almost about 25 crore of her people. Now, if we compare it with America, which supposedly is having the best vaccination rate at the moment, America has vaccinated around 29, 30 crore people, 300 million. America has vaccinated these many people in 5 months. We have vaccinated these many people in 4 months. So if we look at the global yardstick, in no way is this process a failure. Of course, we need to ramp it up, and I'm glad to see that corrective measures to that effect have been taken. But when you constantly keep crying wolf, paint, doomsday scenario, it only portends to a basic fact that this is not sensitization, this is not sympathy or coverage of ground realities, or rather, this is this COVID-19 is a fresh issue in that entire list of agendas we have been seeing all through in these last years, ranging from the Rafale deal, ranging from the farmers' protest, ranging from the CAA NRC protests. Absolute falsehood and lies have been spread to create furor in the country, to create an environment of civil unrest. And what is also apparently very unfortunate, that even in such a time, the media has a huge, of course, not the entire section, a certain influences section has failed to play the role of a solidarity maker, which many countries the media has. I mean, we have seen certain states being targeted particularly, as if deaths have only been happening in certain states. Of course, some of those states maybe are going to elections next year. Certain states, despite failing, there's absolutely no coverage which you have seen. This is the way they have vitiated people. You know, animosity gets driven up in social media, and this entire coverage is actually a part. A lot of it is externally influenced, and a lot of it arises out of compulsive hatred for the government of the day. So, as I conclude my brief, I hope it was brief comments, my brief lecture. What I see going ahead is the traditional facets of governance or the traditional facets of lawmaking are not seeming capable enough in assuaging or convincing people across the world, especially in democracies. We have rightly entered an age of psychological warfare, an age of asymmetric warfare, where misinformation or rather disinformation rules the roost, and where your ground realities would be completely ignored, and artificially some issues would be tried to be raked up. And what I foresee is most of these are happening with a clear intent of regime change, and to induce a prolonged period of civil rights, civil anarchy, and instability in certain countries. So thank you. I'm through.